There's one group that has enormous power. It's the most powerful country in the Middle East. It's backed by the United States. It acts on another population of people with total impunity and is never held accountable for anything. So there's no symmetry in the relationship, period. And just as like a thought experiment, IDW people, if we know that if somehow a population of Jewish refugees ended up in West Bank and Gaza, and an Arabic government in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv had an open air prison in Jewish Gaza, which they bombed with white phosphorus, they killed civilians indiscriminately, and they had no provisions for medicine. They had an embargo that blocked food, that electricity wasn't running, that there was an over 48% unemployment rate, life expectancy and malnutrition statistics were horrifying. One of the major policymakers in this hypothetical Arabic Palestinian state said, we need to put those Jews on a diet. In the West Bank, there was another Jewish area where there was a little bit more autonomy, but there was regular Arabic settlements where they pulled up the Jewish farmers' foods, they terrorized them with rocks, the security forces broke children's bones, and they couldn't drive their own roads. We'd all have no problem understanding what that was. So there's nothing complex about it. The second part of your question, it's a pure asymmetry relationship. And the question is rights or not. So that's it. It's not complex.
All right, I kind of had to start this video with that clip. And now we're going to move on to something David Dole said that I completely agree with. And then straight after that, I have a bit of a news clip for an update on the situation.
I don't want to see any civilian, Israeli, Palestinian, I don't want to see any civilian hurt or killed. Most people, I think, I would hope, want that.
The Israeli military has told more than 1 million Gaza residents to leave their homes in advance of further airstrikes and an expected ground operation in retaliation for last Saturday's Hamas terror attacks in Israel.
I would just like to note that he said in retaliation, not in defense of, but we will discuss that more later in the video. And you should probably be used to the way I make videos by now, where I'm going to show you a series of clips with information that I believe is important, and you'll hear from me when you have to. So let's go back to something from David Dole.
Israel's defense minister says, quote, I've ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we will act accordingly.
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
When you hear the statements from the Israeli defense minister that they're going to cut off food and power, fuel, which they effectively have done at this point. There is apparently no more power in the country. And thereby they will then shortly cut off really any ability to even record what's going on there. I mean, I think there are some journalists there. 7 have already died. 2 Israeli journalists have died. 7 Palestinian journalists have died. You got UN staffers, like we mentioned, dead from the bombing. And they have essentially cut off the only escape valve and the only aid valve to Gaza in Egypt by bombing the Rafah gate. And it seems like a concerted effort to make it impossible for information to even be, in some instances, recorded in Gaza, never mind in real-time reports.
Sam makes a very important point there about the media capabilities in Gaza, which reminded me of something from 2 years ago that I have to include. Back in May of 2021, Israel hit a building that housed foreign media outlets in Gaza. It had AP and Al Jazeera and others. They were given an hour to evacuate. And now this is obviously relevant because of Israel's attempt to make it impossible to report out of Gaza. And so it's going to be very difficult to report out of Gaza. And obviously the media has an important role to play, especially external media sources and what they're reporting about it. Just little things like this, like the choice of words and what people they're talking about, because when we hear killed, we're going to think by somebody, but if you hear dead, that may not be at the hands of somebody else. So just little things like that I wanted to draw your attention to.
Not that it's any type of like mitigation for the hordes, because you did have babies and children killed in this attack by Hamas. But the story of the babies being beheaded, we should say, has essentially been debunked. The Israeli
or unconfirmed, at least.
Well, the military, the Israeli military came out and said we can't confirm that story.
You've likely seen the headlines about 40 babies being beheaded by Hamas fighters in the Kfar Aza village in southern Israel. It's hard to miss. It's everywhere. It's been carried by a number of reputable news outlets, repeated on live TV by powerful political figures, and featured on the front cover of British newspapers. The only problem is there's so far no proof to the story, but it hasn't stopped a spiraling and dizzying loop of hysteria from dominating the news cycle over the last few days. So how did it spread? And what is it being used to justify? This story was first reported by the Israeli news outlet I-24 on Tuesday. During an on-the-ground report in the kibbutz of Kfar Aza, an Israeli reporter first mentions the incident.
David, it's hard to even explain exactly just the mass casualties that happened right here. In fact, the Israeli military says they still don't have a clear number, but I'm talking to some of the soldiers and they say what they've witnessed as they've been walking through these different houses, these different communities, babies, their heads cut off. That's what they said.
Nicole Zedek later clarified that the claim came from one of the Israeli commanders she spoke to.
We walk door after door. We kill a lot of the terrorists. We are stronger than them. They are aggressive. They are very bad. They cut head of children, cut head of women, but we are stronger than them.
The claim was immediately picked up by other reporters. It was repeated on the front page of the Times newspaper by reporter Anshel Pfeffer, featuring in the headline in quote marks. But in the story itself, there are no quotes that back up the story. Instead, Pfeffer writes some soldiers said there were up to 40 babies' corpses found, and that there were claims that some had their throats cut. But no one is named as having said the quote, and the reporter, despite being on the ground as bodies were being excavated, doesn't claim to have seen this himself. It's also repeated on the front pages of The Independent, Metro, The Telegraph, and The Sun. All of them cite Nicole Zedek's report, but cannot verify it themselves. By Wednesday, questions around the accuracy of the story begin to surface, particularly after a report by Anadolu Agency cites the IDF saying they had not confirmed the allegations. A number of reporters who ran the story then begin to walk it back, saying they were simply repeating what they had heard from soldiers and from the I-24 story. By the evening, the story had changed again, with CNN announcing they had confirmed it with Israeli Prime Minister's office.
We have some really disturbing new information out of Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister's spokesman just confirmed babies and toddlers were found with their heads decapitated.
No, we had been hearing reports that this had happened, but now we are getting this confirmed directly from the Israeli Prime Minister's office.
But that seemed to have been picked up from an interview between Tal Heinrich, the spokesperson from Benjamin Netanyahu, with LBC, where she cites the same source as the initial story: soldiers on the ground.
When you listed the unconscionable atrocities that took place in that kibbutz, you did say that babies had been decapitated. Can I take that as confirmation then? Because that currently is being reported as reported action. That has actually happened, has it, Tam?
Toddlers, babies, I can tell you that they, some of them, heads were cut off. This is what we're hearing from from soldiers on the ground, and yes, they cut off heads. They cut off heads.
Then on Wednesday evening, the US president repeated the claim during a live broadcast, saying he had seen the pictures himself.
I've been doing this a long time. I never really thought that I would see and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children. I never thought I'd ever. Anyway,
That was picked up by almost every US media outlet, who ran the story as having finally been confirmed. Then, the White House retracted the statement, telling media Biden and other US officials have not seen pictures or confirmed such reports independently. The US president's remarks were based on media reports and claims made by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's spokesperson. An IDF spokesperson then tells Sky News Australia that the story has been verified and cites two sources who spoke to the media.
I can tell you that it's been verified firsthand by a senior official in our coronary service. And there's a senior person who was identified on record. I think he was on CBS News, personally testified to the fact that he indeed saw the heads of severed babies. And I know that the Israeli Prime Minister's office has also corroborated the news. I, of course, haven't seen the atrocity myself, but I think those two sources enough.
But when Sky News interviewed two IDF spokespeople on the ground at Kfar Aza, neither of them mentions the claims, despite speaking in detail about the civilian deaths in the village. When Business Insider tried to press the IDF for proof, spokesperson Major Nir Dinar responded, saying the IDF would not investigate the condition of the bodies. Quote, "The war crimes that Hamas committed are obvious to the world and are seen in the world. And I don't need to provide any proof of that, and I'm not going to," Dinar said. "It's disrespectful for the dead." When pressed further, he said the IDF were relying on testimonies from soldiers pointing to the same video originally aired by I-24. Back to square one. Until today, no conclusive official statement has been released by Netanyahu's office, the IDF, or the coroner's office, shutting down the skepticism around the reports once and for all. It is a horrific circular debate unlikely to be resolved soon. But the conduct of the media must be scrutinized because there are real consequences. To be clear, all the reporting from the ground in places like Kfar Aza indicates hundreds of civilians were killed, and the details are gruesome and hard to comprehend. However, there is always a need for accuracy, specifically in times of war. What Hamas is accused of could potentially amount to war crimes, which means there is a procedure in place for collecting evidence, documenting eyewitness testimony, and verifying each and every claim.
Because I cannot think of anything that would be much more important than atrocities done to children. And I played that clip, which I'm grateful I found, for as long as I did, because I had to include the final thing he said, because that's very much how I feel, with the emphasis on a need for accuracy and for evidence to be collected correctly for the sake of the victims and their loved ones. And to really stress the need for accuracy, to avoid things like having the President of the United States making comments publicly that then need to be walked back. And so I'll make it clear that the part with the President of the United States making comments about it and then the actions done in response to these claims about what's happened to children, they are the similarities I see between what we were just talking about and what I'm about to show you, and not the accuracy of the actual claim, just so no one comes for me.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying. I could not help but think of my nephew.
Nayyirah's testimony was rebroadcast across the country and marked a turning point in public opinion on going to war. President George H.W. Bush repeatedly cited her claims.
They had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
3 months after Nayyirah testified, President George H.W. Bush launched the invasion of Iraq. But it turned out Nayyirah's claims weren't true. No human rights group or news outlet could confirm what she said. It also turned out Nayyirah was not just any Kuwaiti teenager. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, Saad Nasir al-Sabah. She had been coached by the public relations firm Hill & Knowlton, which was working for the Kuwaiti government.
And obviously I'm not the only one that's made this observation.
But at this other time, like people pointed out, October 10th, 1990 was the Nayyirah testimony before the United States Congressional Human Rights Caucus ahead of the support to George W. Bush in their rationale to support Kuwait in the Iraq War. So like
George H.W. Bush.
H.W. Bush, right.
This was the Kuwait invasion,
Yeah.
and the ambassador's daughter, I think it
right.
was,
Yep.
testified of seeing babies ripped out of incubators by Iraqi soldiers. And it, you know, these are things that sort of are developed, that are told to increase public support and to essentially increase the appetite for what the public is willing to digest in terms of the actions by, in that instance, the U.S. government. It's also part of, Kuwait trying to encourage the U.S. government to come in. Or in this instance, how much horror Netanyahu will be licensed to perpetrate on innocent civilians in Gaza. That's basically what's going on.
Yep, exactly. Like cutting off their electricity and fuel and water, and this will actually have an impact on so many people, including babies in incubators.
And what about those Palestinians in hospital who are on life support, and babies in incubators whose life support and incubator will have to be turned off because the Israelis have cut the power to Gaza?
Are you seriously keep on asking me about Palestinian civilians?
Although this seems like the perfect time to then go into talking about Gaza having its electricity and water cut off, that's what I would do, but I noticed something in the chyron on that clip that I wanted to have a look at.
Seriously keep on asking me about Palestinian civilians? What's wrong with you? Have you not seen what happened? We're fighting.
Now then, Israel has confirmed it is responsible for 2 simultaneous attacks in Syria. One targeted Aleppo International Airport, which is currently out of service. The other strike hit the capital, Damascus Airport, in fact.
I would just like to note that Israel confirmed that it attacked Syria, just going off of the discussion on whether they will confirm certain claims or not. And just a heads up for anyone who wants to look into this further, you have to pay attention to the date. You'll have reports about the recent one a couple of months ago, a couple of months before that, a couple of years ago, going all the way back to 2013. And since we're having a look at neighboring countries to Israel at this moment, we should address something that was said by Trump, since we already had Biden say something. Let's hear from their previous president.
But Hezbollah, they're very smart, and they have a national defense minister or somebody saying, I hope Hezbollah doesn't attack us from the north. So the following morning they attacked. They might not have been doing it, but if you listen to this jerk, you would attack from the north, because he said that's our weak spot.
All right, one important piece of information is that Hezbollah is based in Beirut, Lebanon. That's where they're from. They're from Lebanon. And when you look at a map and see where these countries are, we will see that Lebanon is north of Israel. And so Hezbollah coming from the north seems like the least surprising thing that could happen. Okay, now we're going to get back to the interviews where people are talking about Gaza having its electricity and water cut off. Now we'll get back to that.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water? Sakir?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation.
Do you think cutting off food, water and electricity is within international law?
I think that Israel has an absolute right to defend itself against terrorism.
That's not the question I asked.
It is an answer to the question that you've asked, and I think it's an appropriate one at this time.
It really is something else. to watch people that are being interviewed and being asked about the water and power and fuel and food being cut off to the people in Gaza, and they respond with, Israel has a right to defend itself. It's like, yeah, okay, all right. I understand that. I'd go one better and I'd say they have a responsibility to defend itself. Then why the fuck didn't they do that? Where were they? Where the fuck was the IDF? Isn't that what it was meant to be, the Israeli Defense Force? Seems like you've got more of a Israeli retaliation force. Doesn't seem to really defend much.
The IDF was redirected to the West Bank to support illegal settlers who are taking more land and raising more villages. And those soldiers were on the border with Gaza, but they were moved elsewhere. So there was this opening on the border with Gaza. And like they say, even Hamas was like, holy cow, we didn't think we would be able to get away with all of this.
The reason why there was so little human protection on that border with Gaza is because so much of the IDF had been sent up into the West Bank to function as essentially, guards for fundamentalist settlers.
All right, I need people to understand that the Gaza Strip is very small and that the border that it shares with Israel is about 60 kilometers long, or about 37 miles. That would mean if you wanted a IDF soldier every 100 meters, you'd only need 600 of them to be every 100 meters along that border. And I want you to keep that in mind whenever you see something like Israel is mobilizing hundreds of thousands of their troops near the border of Gaza for a ground invasion.
What happened was Israel got very complacent because they have all this high-tech stuff. Their defense capabilities are colossal. They have this like high-tech wall and stuff, and they have all this spying technology that they've been, I think it's called Pegasus. I think we reported on it when it came out. And so they felt like, hey, we're hearing nothing about Hamas planning some sort of terror attack. It seems like there's been relative calm for an extended period of time now. So we just don't think Hamas is going to launch a full-scale war. They even came out and said that at one point. And apparently they didn't realize that Hamas had reverted to old school means of communication. They weren't relying on technology anymore.
And now I'm going to have to highlight what it is they want us to believe with this information being presented to us, and the possible options for the conclusions you can get. And spoiler alert, none of them are good. So they want us to believe that Israel, with its very advanced technology for surveillance and spying, was outsmarted and outdone by simply no longer using technology. And so Israeli intelligence no longer had information coming to them, so they just thought, yeah, everything must be fine then. There's nothing could happen because we can't find it out, so it should be sweet. That is what they want us to believe. Okay. And we can go along with that and believe them. I don't really think that's doing them any favors, but okay. So they couldn't detect it themselves. All right, well, what if somehow, some way they were warned? They were given a heads up. What if that happened?
Egyptian intelligence officials reached out to Israeli officials about 10 days ago. And they were like, hey man, we're hearing rumblings of an imminent terror attack that's going to happen against Israel. Now, according to Netanyahu, this was never brought to his attention. Nobody ever brought this to him directly. And so nothing was really done about it. So here's Ken Klippenstein of The Intercept. He's talking about it here. Sources confirmed reports that emerged on Monday to the effect that senior Egyptian officials had warned Israel of an impending assault from Gaza. They said Egyptian intelligence officials had indeed shared warnings with their Israeli counterparts, but the information was not specific or focused and was not brought to Netanyahu's attention.
Alright, this is from BBC News on the 11th of October 2023. Egypt warned Israel days before Hamas struck, US committee chairman said. And now I'm not going to read the whole article to you. Israel was warned by Egypt of potential violence 3 days before Hamas's deadly cross-border raid, a US congressional panel chairman has said. House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee head Michael McCall told reporters of the alleged warning. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the reports as absolutely false. Israeli intelligence services are under scrutiny for their failure to prevent the deadliest attack by Palestinian militants in Israel's 75-year history. We know that Egypt has warned the Israelis 3 days prior that an event like this could happen, Mr. McCall told reporters following a closed-door intelligence briefing on Wednesday for lawmakers about the Middle East crisis, according to AFP news agency. I don't want to get too much into classified, but a warning was given, the Texas Republican added. I think the question was at what level. An Egyptian intelligence officer told the Associated Press news agency this week that Cairo had repeatedly warned the Israelis that something big was planned from Gaza. We have warned them an explosion of the situation is coming and very soon, and it would be big, but they underestimated such warnings, said the official who spoke on the condition of anonymity. The Cairo official said Israeli officials had played down the threat from Gaza, instead focusing on the West Bank. Sir Alex Younger, who served as chief of the UK's Foreign Intelligence Agency between 2014 and 2020, said Hamas fighters were able to carry out their attack on 7th of October due to institutional complacency in Israel. According to the Financial Times, quoting two unnamed officials familiar with the matter, there was no hard intelligence of a specific attack. On Wednesday, Mr. Netanyahu described any suggestion that Israel had received a specific warning in advance of the deadly incursion as totally fake news. Despite being warned by a neighboring nation, they thought it was a good idea to move all their soldiers away from a very small area to patrol. And then the attack happened. Alright, so we'll believe everything they're saying, so then that must lead us to the assumption that there is extreme incompetency in their leadership. Their leadership shat the bed, if they want us to believe what they're telling us. Alright, so we should probably have a closer look at their leadership then. We already had a brief look at their Minister for Defense. I think we need to have a look at their Minister for National Security.
במרקם חיים, הזכות שלי, של אשתי, של הילדים שלי, להסתובב בכבישי יהודה ושומרון, יותר חשוב מזכות התנועה של הערבים. סליחה מוחמד, אבל זו המציאות, זו האמת, זכות החיים שלי קודמת לזכות התנועה.
דובי, קודם כל יש מנהג יהודי קדום, שכשעוברים ליד מנזר או ליד כומר יורקים. אפשר להסכים או לא להסכים, אבל כאשר יורקים לצד, אני לא חושב שזה מבטא...
יש גם מנהג יהודי, כל מנהג יהודי קדום אנחנו חייבים לקיים, תגיד?
לא, לא, זה לא העניין, זה לא העניין. העניין הוא למה להפוך את זה לעניין פלילי.
זה לא עובדים ככה, אתה מפקיר את החיים שלנו.
לא מסתכלים כאן, תראו בהם, אם זורקים אבנים יורים בהם.
לראות להם, אם זורקים אבנים יורים בהם. אם החיים שלנו, רק תת בקלפי, רק תת.
אם זורקים אבנים יורים בהם.
איתמר, למה אתה שולף?
סכנת חיים שלנו.
איתמר, למה אתה שולף נשק?
And another important piece of information about the Minister of National Security is the fact that he has a portrait of Goldstein on his wall. And for that to mean anything to you, you're going to have to know who Goldstein was.
On the 25th of February 1994, during the holy month of Ramadan, US-born Jewish settler Baruch Goldstein entered the Ibrahimi Mosque in the old city of Hebron. 4 minutes into Fajr prayer, as Palestinian worshippers bowed down in sujood, Goldstein opened fire, killing 29 Palestinians, some of them as young as 12. Baruch Goldstein was active in the extremist Kach political movement, a party founded in 1971 by radical Zionist Meir Kahane.
There is no Palestine, no Palestinians. There never was, there never will be. They're Arabs, and let them go live in Jordan.
The Kach Party was banned in Israel and declared a terrorist organization in 1994 after its members expressed support for the Ibrahimi Mosque massacre. But 3 decades later, Goldstein's radical Kahanist ideology has been embraced by Israel's mainstream. In 2022, leader of the far-right party, Jewish Power, Itamar Ben-Gvir, a man known for hanging up a portrait of Goldstein in his living room, signed a coalition agreement with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, making him Minister of National Security.
Ah yes, and now this brings us to Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. And so I thought I would compile all the parts where he's been talked about and the role he played and what happened. Compile all of that from all the videos I've already used to make this.
For years, this is from the Times of Israel. For years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Now it's blown up in our faces. Netanyahu has propped up Hamas specifically because he does not want to see an independent Palestine. He sees Hamas as a vehicle for the destruction that he wants to cause. To give you more clarity on this, most of the time, Israeli policy was to treat the Palestinian Authority, which is a group that wants to see peace, as a burden, and Hamas as an asset. Far-right finance minister in the hardline government and leader of the religious Zionism party said so himself in 2015. According to various reports, Netanyahu made a similar point at a Likud faction meeting in early 2019 when he was quoted as saying that those who oppose a Palestinian state should support the transfer of funds to Gaza, in this case being Hamas, because maintaining the separation between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza would prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state.
Hamas was in many ways propped up by Israel because they were the more secular PLO. They were more afraid of them, so they wanted to prop up Hamas. And here's Netanyahu. This is in 2019. Quote, anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. He said this to the Likud party's Knesset members in 2019. Quote, this is part of our strategy. And this is from Haaretz, one of the top newspapers in Israel. They've been scathing against Netanyahu, basically blaming him squarely for this terror attack. Look, they said it. What more do I have to add to it? They said it's part of our strategy to support Hamas because we feel like they're such a bad representative that people will be less likely to support a Palestinian state if Hamas is the head of Gaza.
Hamas itself was essentially midwifed by the Israeli government.
This is a quote, from Netanyahu in 2019. Talking to the Likud members of his party, anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank.
When he was quoted as saying that those who oppose a Palestinian state should support the transfer of funds to Gaza, in this case being Hamas, because maintaining the separation between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza would prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state.
Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas.
He said this to the Likud party's Knesset members in 2019. Quote, this is
part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank.
Alright, I'm just going to come out and say it because it's blatantly obvious to me, because the only reason you would want to support a group that wants to attack you would be to hope for that attack, and therefore giving you the green light to not defend yourself, but retaliate and get the support from all of the world leaders, because why else would you support a group that wants to attack you? And now I'm not saying that every factor of what happened was deliberate, everything's not one big conspiracy, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if they were just big fuck-ups on the part of the Israeli government or intentional choices done with a goal. It doesn't really matter, because what the results were the loss of Israeli lives, and now they are going in and flattening parts of Gaza, as you can see on the screen right now, because I got this clip from Benjamin Netanyahu's Twitter account. And I thought this video needed some more maps. I didn't have enough maps in this video, so here is one of Palestine partition plan approved by UN General Assembly on November 29th, 1947, with the green being the Jewish state. And if we go down and have a look, you can see that the West Bank and Gaza are touching. And I've got a more recent map to have a look at as well. And as we can see, they're now separated. And I just want to note this oil pipeline that's there now. And as a whole, the country is very small, about the size of the state of New Jersey. For Australians, that's like less than a third of Tasmania. That's the whole country. Now let's talk about Gaza, the Gaza Strip. I already told you how long the border is, and so the area of it is just 360 square kilometers, and it has over 2 million people there. It is the most densely populated place in the whole world. And now this brings us to the evacuation order for over 1 million people to leave the half of the Gaza Strip that has Gaza City to avoid being bombed. That is an insane amount of people that were already crammed into a very, very small area, and now they want to pretty much halve the area and double the people. With no power, no water. This is genocide. Because I have a question. After they're made to evacuate and they flatten Gaza City, are they going to be able to go back? Is there going to be anything to go back to? Or is it going to be a permanent change to half the space and double the amount of people? I also want to add to this video some information about something you may have heard people mention while talking about this.
Which they bombed with white phosphorus.
And so here is what I found from Human Rights Watch. Alright, this is from October 12th, 2023, titled Israel, White Phosphorus Used in Gaza, Lebanon. As you can see, this is footage of white phosphorus being shot out of a projectile with the dense smoke going towards the earth. It says that dense smoke and the smell of garlic are characteristics of white phosphorus. And now here's some of the really horrifying information. White phosphorus ignites when exposed to atmospheric oxygen and continues to burn until it's deprived of oxygen or exhausted. Its chemical reaction can create light, smoke, and intense heat, about 815 degrees Celsius or 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Upon contact, white phosphorus can burn people thermally and chemically down to the bone, as it is highly soluble in fat and therefore in human flesh. White phosphorus fragments can exacerbate wounds even after treatment and can enter the bloodstream and cause multiple organ failure. Already dressed wounds can reunite when dressings are removed and the wounds are re-exposed to oxygen. Even relatively minor burns. So, just thought I would add this as well, because you may have heard people mention the white phosphorus and may not have been aware of what it exactly does, and I wanted to include that information. If you made it this far through the video, I just want to say thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This video was gonna have to be long because it's about something that is important in general, but was also important to Michael Brooks. So I did my best, and I hope you got something from it. Thanks for watching.